Welcome once again. Welcome back to the December surprise, the politics of terror, and the exoneration of the secret team. Now, one of the reasons why I'm taking a look at the Pizza Connection 4, as we're calling it, also like Pizza Connection 3, a cocaine for heroin operation, is because of the many, many links to the Iran-Contra scandal that I have just finished enumerating on the previous cassette side. Now, again, bearing in mind the metaphor, the football metaphor that I used at the beginning of that last section, that of freezing the linebackers, one of the things to consider in connection with the working hypothesis that I'm presenting this evening is just how many linebackers, quote unquote, and remember in this context I'm talking about using the term linebackers as a metaphor for key players in the Iran-Contra scandal. Think about how many linebackers would potentially have been frozen by Pizza Connection 4, with all of the many, many shores upon which the waters of the oceans of the Pizza Connection lap. Think of how many mouths would be closed by an investigation like that. On both sides of the Atlantic, and as we looked at in Radio Free America's 32 and 34, there are many Italian connections to the Iran-Contra scandal. A great many mouths on both sides of the Atlantic would have been closed potentially by the Pizza Connection 4 bust, because a lot of people perhaps stood to go to jail or perhaps die of apparent heart attacks or whatever pursuant to investigations, given the gravity of the many, many issues attendant upon one aspect or another of the Pizza Connection case. And the shooting of the Pope, the integrity of George Bush and family, the Iran-Contra scandal, among other things, big-time drug smuggling, all of these things stand to be shaken out of the tree if the Pizza Connection 4 investigators shake sufficiently hard. So again, think of how many potential sources of information might have been silenced by a bust like this, because again, the information broke on December 2nd of 1988. The following day, more information about Pizza Connection 4 surfaced. This in an article in the San Francisco Examiner from Saturday, December 3rd of 1988. This particular article is by Malcolm Glover and Nina Martin of the Examiner staff. I'm just going to read a section of it. It's called 5 More Arrests in Mafia Ring, and it says Ethiopian held in big seizures of drugs and money. Talking about Sergio Morangi, the aforementioned associate of Rudy Tam, and Rudy Tam, of course, being an associate of Jimmy Fratiano. The article says, the FBI has identified Morangi, the 51, the former owner of a North Beach restaurant, as the Bay Area's main connection to the powerful Gambino crime family in New York. He and 10 other local men were among 207 people indicted in 8 U.S. cities and Italy after a 3-year investigation by American and Italian authorities of a vast drug network centered in Sicily. The ring allegedly shipped cocaine from South America to Italy, exchanged some of it for heroin, and distributed both drugs throughout Europe and the United States, often through restaurants. So again, this, like Pizza Connection 3, and it may well be the same operation, is a cocaine for heroin operation. Now, the same day that the original article appeared in the popular press, or articles appeared in the popular press, announcing Pizza Connection 4, the following story was carried in the San Jose Mercury News. Again, we're talking the same day, Friday, December 2nd of 1988. This story appeared in the Mercury. It's an AP story out of Morelia, Mexico, headlined, Plane Crash Kills Israeli Named in Iran Arms Case. Again, AP story, Morelia, Mexico. An Israeli who was linked to the U.S. Iran-Contra affair and who briefed Vice President George Bush on arms deals with Iran apparently died in a plane crash, officials said Thursday. The man was tentatively identified by a passport found on his body as Amiram Nir Nisker, Nisker, a former advisor on counterterrorism to 2 Israeli prime ministers, said a statement from Michoacan State Attorney General's office. From the Michoacan State Attorney General's office. Nir's former newspaper colleagues in Israel said Thursday his name was Nisker before he changed it to Nir. They gave his age as 38. The pilot of the Cessna T-210 also was killed in the crash Wednesday in western Michoacan State, and 2 people were badly hurt, the Mexican statement said. It said engine failure may have been the cause. Officials and sources in Israel, speaking on condition of anonymity, said Nir was in Mexico on a business trip, but would not disclose its nature. Near was an important liaison in secret arms deals involving sale of U.S. weapons to Iran, according to testimony heard by U.S. congressional investigators. Former White House aide Oliver North, who was deeply involved in the transactions, suggested during congressional testimony that the Contra link, diverting funds from U.S. arms sales to Iran to Nicaraguan rebels, was Near's idea. Israel denied it. Near was sought for questioning by Special U.S. Prosecutor Lawrence E. Walsh. Israel insisted Near be granted immunity from prosecution. Skipping down in the story, Near remained at his advisory post even after Yitzhak Shamir succeeded Perez as prime minister in October of 1986, and the Iran-Contra affair exploded that November. By the way, he was top counterterrorism advisor to Perez. Continuing. Near also traveled to Tehran in May of 1986 with North and former National Security Advisor Robert McFarlane to discuss the release of U.S. hostages held by pro-Iranian extremists in Lebanon in return for a supply of anti-aircraft Hawk missiles. Later in 1986, Near briefed Bush in Israel about the transactions with Iran. Bush has said he does not remember much about the briefing, but his aide Craig Fuller took notes. Israel banned Near and the other Israelis involved in the affair from testifying before the congressional Iran-Contra hearings. Well, I think, again, bearing in mind that this article appeared in the Mercury the same day the articles about the Pizza Connection 4 bust appeared in the popular press, December 2nd, 1988, the very same day, it's interesting to contemplate what impact the death of Amiram Nir has had upon the investigation into the Iran-Contra scandal. In Radio Free America number 33, we detailed the many suspicious deaths and apparent murders in connection with the Iran-Contra case. There is a long hit list indeed involving people who dropped dead and for one reason or another were not able to provide key information to the people investigating this massive case. Quite possibly, Amiram Nir's name can be added to those people who were deep-sixed, who were gotten rid of. Certainly he's no longer on the scene, and the timing of his plane crash, I think, raises some very serious questions. Among the people who perhaps stood to be sullied by information he might have come up with include current President-elect George Bush and also, obviously, Oliver North. Now, again, the very same day that Pizza Connection 4 was popularized in the newspapers, the very same day that the death of Amiram Nir, who worked with Oliver North on aspects of the Iran-Contra scandal as well as George Bush, President Reagan, as announced in the papers, not only decided not to pardon Oliver North, but decided not to release sensitive intelligence documents requested by North's defense. Again, from the same day, Friday, December 2nd of 1988. Again, from the New York Times, as reprinted in the San Francisco Chronicle, right next to the Iran-Contra figure killed in crash. A New York Times story, again, Dateline Washington headline, Iran-Contra affair, or subheaded Iran-Contra affair, headed Reagan rules out pardon for North. President Reagan yesterday emphatically ruled out a pardon for Oliver North, the former White House aide indicted on charges stemming from the Iran-Contra affair. Reagan said, however, that the White House has a duty, quote unquote, to withhold certain classified documents from the trial of North. That decision could prompt dismissal of some or all of the charges. So bear in mind, in addition to promising here not to pardon Oliver North, Ronald Reagan is also vowing not to release certain sensitive documents which he says he has a responsibility not to release. And again, all three articles, Pizza Connection 4 as we're calling it, with all of the many connections to Iran-Contra scandal, all of the many tongues that might have wagged and that perhaps now won't wag for fear of getting involved in that massive bust. The same day that Amiram Nir's plane crash was announced, and the same day that Reagan says, not releasing the documents even if that gets Ali off the hook. Now, 2 days later, we're talking about Sunday, December 4th of 1988, a very important story was broken by Bob Woodward of the Washington Post and carried by, among other newspapers, the San Jose Mercury, again of Sunday, December 4th of 1988. This is a Washington Post story co-authored by Bob Woodward and Walter Pincus, P-I-N-C-U-S. Stateline Washington and headlined by the San Jose Mercury, U.S.-Israeli Secret Pact on Terror. The article reads, Amiram Nir, N-I-R, the former Israeli official who died in a Mexican plane crash Wednesday, said last June that a confidential Israeli-American agreement authorized still-secret counter-terrorist operations that he and Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North supervised in 1985 and 1986. Remember those years, 1985 and 86, they're pivotal here. We'll be coming back to them later. Let me repeat the opening paragraph. Amiram Nir, the former Israeli official who died in a Mexican plane crash Wednesday, said last June that a confidential Israeli-American agreement authorized still-secret counter-terrorist operations that he and Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North supervised in 1985 and 6. U.S. and Israeli sources confirmed that there was an Israeli-American agreement referred to as Terms of Reference or Accords, unquote, by some sources. Its existence has never been disclosed to Congress, according to U.S. sources familiar with it. Disclosure of the agreement adds yet another layer to the mysteries surrounding the Iran-Contra affair. As described by Nir, the agreement led to a series of covert actions that had common tactical elements. The now famous secret transactions that produced unauthorized aid for the Nicaraguan Contras from the profits of arms sales to Iran may have fit a pattern established in those other secret undertakings. And like the arms for hostages dealings with Iran, these other secret operations were apparently hidden from Congress, contrary to law. A White House spokesman said Saturday that the Reagan administration would not comment on the agreement or any operations that may have been conducted under it. Yossi Gal, Y-O-S-S-I, capital G-A-L, a spokesman for the Israeli embassy, said, quote, I won't go into this agreement. Israel and the United States have lots of agreements. We have never maintained that Nir was operating on his own or as a renegade. Everything he did was being done by the government of Israel, unquote. Nir disclosed the existence of an agreement during interviews in London last June. He maintained that secret U.S.-Israeli covert operations were authorized by President Reagan and then Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres under the Accords. Few details of these operations have been disclosed. Nir said the Israeli government has detailed records of all of them. One operation conducted under the agreement was the organizing of an armed force of Lebanese Druze in Beirut in May of 1986, at a time when the White House was considering the use of force to try to free American hostages. References were made to the North Nir off-the-books operation during the congressional Iran-Contra investigation. But Nir's assertion that the operations were carried out under an agreement was the first indication that he and North, who has since retired from the military, claimed top-level governmental authority for their activities. During the London interview with the Washington Post last June, Nir discussed some of his activities with the understanding that these were preliminary and private, unquote, conversations. He said that he expected to tell his story publicly later, and that the information he provided was not to be attributed to him without further discussions. Post editors concluded that Nir's death Wednesday removed the reasons for the agreement to withhold attribution to Nir of the information he provided. Nir was a central figure in many aspects of the Iran-Contra affair. He was cited by North as the originator in November of 1985 of the idea of generating profits from arms sales to Iran to fund other covert projects, the idea North used later to divert support to the Nicaraguan rebels. Nir represented Israel in negotiations with U.S. and Iranian representatives that led to 3 shipments of U.S. arms to Iran in 1986. He accompanied former National Security Advisor Robert McFarlane and North on their secret mission to Tehran in May of 1986. Nir said in the June interview that McFarlane failed to improvise and take advantage of the meetings, that, quote, fully 50% of this trip is not known, unquote, and that he had extensive notes on this and other aspects of the secret initiative. With Iranian middleman Manucher Ghorbanifar, Nir arranged for Iranian help in freeing the Reverend Lawrence Genko, an American hostage held by Lebanese extremists. Genko was released in July of 1986, based on Ghorbanifr's promise that the United States would subsequently ship arms to Tehran. On July 29th of 1986, within days after Genko was released, Nir briefed Vice President George Bush and his Chief of Staff, Craig Fuller, in Israel on the need to respond to the release by shipping arms to Iran. Like the other Israeli participants in the affair, Nir was barred by his government from answering questions from the U.S. Justice Department, independent counsel Lawrence Walsh, and congressional investigators. Nir was interviewed during an Israeli investigation, and information he provided was included in reports Israel filed with the House Senate Iran-Contra committees and Walsh. Nir said Israel has assembled extensive records not turned over to the United States, based in part on his detailed notes and papers. They provided point-by-point documentation of all contacts, discussions, and undertakings with U.S. officials, including North, Nir said. Nir said he also provided full written reports to his superiors and gave oral briefings to Peres, the Israeli prime minister, who hired him as counter-terrorist advisor, and later to Peres's successor, Yitzhak Shamir. Nir said he was, quote, on a short leash, unquote. At the time North and Nir joined forces in 1985, the former military correspondent for Israeli television was the newly appointed counter-terrorist advisor to Peres. North was a member of the staff of the National Security Council and was responsible for coordinating counter-terrorist activities for the White House. There are a number of key aspects to this particular article. First of all, again, simply the death of Amiram Nir obviously has silenced one of the individuals who might have provided a great deal of information about the Iran-Contra affair, as indicated in this story. Now, a couple of the significant aspects of the story that we should take note of, as noted in the article, the Washington Post editors who have had this information through Bob Woodward since June did not feel empowered to make the information public, to disclose it, until after Amiram Nir's death in this plane crash. So the making public of this interview was made possible by the assassination or death, I believe it was an assassination, but let's be fair, by the death in the plane crash of Amiram Nir. The same day as President Reagan says he won't release sensitive documents if they will disclose vital intelligence, the same day that the Pizza Connection 4 bust occurs, also touching on many aspects of the Iran-Contra scandal and the machinations of the U.S. national security establishment and the secret team over the last 20 years or so. Now, it should be noted that the documents here pertain to joint U.S.-Israeli counter-terrorist operations in calendar years 1985 and 6, the point men for the U.S. and Israel respectively here being Oliver North and the late Amiram Nir. Now, in calendar years 1985 and 6, there were a number of very significant terrorist incidents, and as indicated in the article, many aspects of the Iran-Contra scandal would have been touched upon by the counter-terrorist activities, or subsumed under the counter-terrorist activities overseen jointly for the U.S. and Israel by North and Amiram Nir, respectively. Now, the story here, when it was floated, and again, we're talking Bob Woodward of the Washington Post. That's Bob Woodward, who, according to Jim Hogan in the book Secret Agenda, had many significant connections to naval intelligence while in the Navy. Bob Woodward, who, along with Carl Bernstein, although credited with breaking the Watergate story, in fact covered up many of the key aspects of the Watergate story, including, among other things, the connections to the assassination of President Kennedy, which were evident, and indeed, according to a hypothesis developed by Deborah Davis in her book Catherine the Great, which we covered in a miscellaneous archive show called Gloria in Excelsis, the CIA and the Women's Movement, the CIA, the news media, and the Women's Movement. In fact, the breaking of the Watergate story was effected by the CIA in order to deny Richard Nixon the complete control over the U.S. national security establishment. According to this thesis presented by Deborah Davis in her book Catherine the Great, and again, that's on a miscellaneous archive tape, Gloria in Excelsis, the CIA was getting rid of Richard Nixon, who sought personal dominance over the CIA, and for this reason, the Washington Post, cited by Deborah Davis as a longtime CIA media asset. In fact, Deborah Davis cites the CIA as not only inextricably linked with the Washington Post, but actually having played a primary role in that newspaper's development over the years. Again, the Washington Post is a long-time CIA media asset, as documented by Deborah Davis in the book Catherine the Great. So as we see Bob Woodward surfacing this story, it should be borne in mind that both Woodward and the paper he was doing this for, the Washington Post, do have long-standing and documented intelligence connections, as we have seen. Bob Woodward also incidentally wrote the book Veil about William Casey, in which he maintains, according to William Casey, whom he interviewed on his deathbed, that William Casey was the guy who was primarily responsible for the Iran-Contra scandal. Of course, he is dead, so if in fact that's the case, it marks sort of a termination of the investigation. Now again, Bob Woodward floats this interview because, in the estimation of the Washington Post, a long-standing CIA media asset developed over the years by people like Frank Wisner, people like Cord Meyer, an in-law of the Bradley family, one of the families involved with the Washington Post, and others, this CIA media asset floats this particular story. And the significance of it is that it discloses that, in fact, there are sensitive documents dealing with joint U.S.-Israeli counter-terror operations in calendar years 1985 and 86. And those years are crucial. And Ali North and Amiram Nir and the Iran-Contra scandal are obviously inextricably linked with these counter-terrorist operations in those years. Now, significantly, among the many terrorist incidents which broke in 85 and 86 was a series of incidents and reprisals, beginning, for our purposes, with the attack on an Israeli cruise ship in Larnaca, Cyprus, by some Palestinian commandos, apparently including, according to court records, a documented British fascist named Ian Davison. We covered these attacks in Radio Free America program number 22. Among the elements to whom that first attack was attributed was an organization called Squad 19, which was attributed. This group originally began with a fellow named Ali Hassan Salameh, a Palestinian terrorist whose geniture goes back to some of the Third Reich-linked terrorists, including Haj Amin al-Husseini, former SS officer and Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, some of the former SS men subsumed under a CIA Galen mission to the Middle East, which formed in order the Egyptian Secret Service, the Libyan Secret Service, and the first Palestinian terrorist organizations. This CIA Galen operation involved, among others, contacts with Haj Amin al-Husseini and former Nazi financier François Genoux, to this very day a key financier of Palestinian terrorism and the so-called fascist third position. Documentary sources for that: Radio Free America shows 3, 4, and 22, and some of the books involved: Unhealed Wounds by Erna Paris, Galen Spy of the Century by E.H. Cookridge, Skorzeny, Hitler's Commando by Glenn Infield, and Martin Bormann, Nazi in Exile by Paul Manning. Those are the literary sources. The Radio Free America sources for that information I've already cited. Also a book, by the way, called The Quest for the Red Prince by Eitan Haybar and Michael Bar-Zohar. All of those sources quoted in those documentaries, in those documentary tapes that I have cited. Now again, in 1985 and 6, we have the attack on the Israeli cruise ship in Larnaca, Cyprus, attributed to the organization formed by Ali Hassan Salameh, a man with connections to the CIA as of July of 73, a man accused of being the mastermind behind the Olympics massacre. Ian Davison, a British fascist, is involved in this attack. In response to this, the Israelis bombed the PLO headquarters in Tunis. Then, in response to that, allegedly, Palestinian terrorist elements hijacked the cruise ship Achille Lauro. This incident now was attributed to a fellow named Abu Abbas. One of the associates of Abu Abbas in the Achille Lauro and other terrorist incidents is a fellow named Mansour al-Qassar. Now, in Radio Free America number 32, we took a look at the fact that this very same Mansour al-Qassar, a Palestinian-linked drug trafficker and terrorist of Syrian origin, Mansour al-Qassar is linked to, first of all, Abu Abbas and also Abu Nidal. It was this very same Mansour al-Qassar that Oliver North tabbed in order to be the middleman in one of the key weapons deals involved in the Iran-Contra scandal, namely the obtaining of a large number of Kalashnikov assault rifles that were shipped on a ship called the Iria. They in turn were destined for the Contras, and we took a look at that in Radio Free America number 32. Another associate of Abu Abbas's that we also covered in Radio Free America number 32 is a man named Ottfried Hipp, a German neo-Nazi whose organizations, among other things, were affiliated with the fascist Third Position, and in turn were fond of launching attacks on U.S. and NATO targets in Europe, those attacks usually being attributed to the left. So again, in 1985 and 86, we have Oliver North and Amiram Nir walking point for the U.S. and Israeli governments, respectively, in counter-terrorist operations. 2 days after Nir's death, the announcement of Nir's death on December 2nd of 1988, Bob Woodward and the CIA-linked Washington Post float the story concerning the joint U.S., Israeli, North, and Nir operation, and that there are documents referring to this. These documents are dealing with counter-terrorist operations in calendar years 85 and 86, involving the elements I just mentioned. Now recall that Oliver North tabbed Mansour al-Qassar, who inevitably was linked with Abu Abbas and Abu Nidal and terror and counter-terror operations in this very same period. A former BND Galen front called Merex, founded by a former Skorzeny associate named Gerhard Mertens, was the organization used by Mansour al-Qassar and Oliver North to help get the Aria shipload of weapons over to this side of the Atlantic. Now again, bear in mind that the Woodward story discloses the existence of documents referring to these counter-terrorist operations. The very same day that Pizza Connection 4, with all of its Iran-Contra scandal connections, is announced, is the very same day that the death of Amiram Nir is announced. The death of Amiram Nir frees up Bob Woodward and the Washington Post to float the story that they have had since June, which discloses the existence of key documents pertaining to North and Nir's American and Israeli counter-terrorist operations of 85 and 86 involving the same Mansour al-Qassar, Merex, Abu Abbas, Abu Nidal links that I have described above. Okay, now keep that in mind, and that's the same day, December 2nd, that Ronald Reagan says, I'm not going to release any documents that are too sensitive. One of the major factors, in my opinion, that necessitated the holding on by the Reagan administration of those documents, and originally announced on December 2nd, and the existence of some key documents having been revealed on December 4th, when the Bob Woodward Washington Post story revealed that North and Amiram Nir had been cooperating on joint American-Israeli counter-terrorist operations in calendar years 85 and 86. One of the factors which, in my opinion, played a primary role in causing the dismissal of the conspiracy charges against Oliver North was the explosion, the terrorist bomb which tore apart PamAm Flight 103 in Lockerbie, Scotland, over the skies of Lockerbie, Scotland, on December 21st of 1980. And again, I'm calling this broadcast the December Surprise. One of the most important aspects of the Lockerbie terrorist bombing was the fact that a great many key U.S. counter-terrorist experts died in the crash of that aircraft. Reading now from the San Jose Mercury News of Friday, January 6th of 1989. This is a story by Susan Bennett of the Mercury News Washington Bureau. It's datelined Washington, headlined, PamAm Crash Killed Experts on Mideast Terror. A high-level CIA official assigned to Beirut, Lebanon, and at least 2 other U.S. counterterrorism specialists from the Middle East died in the bomb explosion aboard PamAm Flight 103, Reagan administration sources have disclosed. Investigators are trying to determine whether terrorists picked the U.S.-bound Flight 103, which originated in Frankfurt, West Germany, because of the sensitive intelligence assignments of these men, according to 2 private aviation security consultants with knowledge of the probe. One security consultant called it an excellent possibility, and the other said it was quite likely, unquote, that terrorists chose the PamAm flight because of who was on it. Both recalled that Middle East terrorists have assassinated at least 9 CIA personnel assigned to Lebanon, including 2 chiefs of station in Beirut, in the last 5 years. One PamAm crash victim was described by officials as a high-level CIA Middle East specialist assigned to Beirut. 2 others were State Department counterterrorism security specialists. One was based in Beirut, the other nearby in Nicosia, Cyprus, according to passenger logs. A second CIA official, whose duties are unknown, also was a passenger aboard the Boeing 747 that exploded in midair December 21st, according to intelligence community sources. According to intelligence community sources, State Department officials, and private aviation security specialists. In addition, an Army intelligence officer, Major Charles McKee, 40, who had been assigned by the Defense Intelligence Agency for a 4-week stint in the Middle East, also perished in the crash. Federal law forbids the identification of CIA officers, and the sources for this story, 5 in all, declined to be identified by name. The loss of at least a dozen American experts since 1983, including the 3 killed on the PamAm flight, had crippled U.S. intelligence capabilities in the Middle East and intimidated sources and operatives there, according to published reports and counterterrorism experts. Let me read that last paragraph again, or the last few sentences again. The loss of at least a dozen American experts since 1983, including the 3 killed on the PamAm flight, has crippled U.S. intelligence capabilities in the Middle East and intimidated sources and operatives there, according to published reports and counterterrorism experts. As a consequence, the CIA has come to depend increasingly on Israeli, French, and British intelligence services, according to knowledgeable Middle East analysts. Shortly after the December 21st crash in Lockerbie, Scotland, several news agencies, including NBC News, reported that the CIA's Beirut station chief was aboard the plane. Oliver B. Revel III, executive assistant director of the FBI, broke with a government tradition of silence on intelligence matters to flatly deny those reports. The station chief from Beirut was not on that aircraft, he said on Christmas Day. At the time, Revel refused further comment because, quote, "We cannot comment on the intelligence community personnel," unquote. This week, State Department and FBI spokesmen said the same. "I cannot confirm whether there were any agency people on board," added CIA spokeswoman Sharon Basso, B-A-S-S-O. The 2 State Department counterterrorism specialists were identified as Ronald A. Lariviere, Lariviere, of Holyoke, Massachusetts, and Daniel E. O'Connor of Boston. Lariviere, or Lariviere, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, Lariviere was the security specialist at the U.S. Embassy in Beirut, according to a spokesman for the State Department's Bureau of Diplomatic Security. O'Connor held the same job at the U.S. Embassy in Nicosia. Personal bodyguard service to U.S. diplomats was their normal responsibility, according to State Department officials, as was the development of counter-terrorist and counter-espionage tactics. Both men were on official travel status for the flight, a State Department spokesman said. But he would not describe their assignments and did not know whether they boarded Flight 103 in Frankfurt or London, or how they reached their boarding point. Lariviere, who lived in Alexandria, Virginia with his wife and 2-year-old daughter, joined the Bureau of Diplomatic Security in May of 1987 and was assigned to Beirut in July of 1988, State Department officials said. They said O'Connor went to work for the Security Bureau in 1986 and was assigned to Nicosia in April of 1988. Until recently, security and counterterrorism personnel with bodyguard responsibilities in hotspots such as Lebanon and El Salvador were drawn from the Army's elite Delta Force unit and assigned to special State Department duty. McKee, a native of Trafford, Pennsylvania, normally worked at the Intelligence and Security Command in Washington, but had been loaned to the Defense Intelligence Agency, Army spokeswoman Paige Eversole said. She would not comment on his mission in the Middle East. And the possibility that even more U.S. counterterrorist personnel may have died in the crash was raised in an article which appeared shortly after the crash, this in the San Jose Mercury News of Thursday morning, December 22nd of 1988, right after the crash. This is a story headline, "Jet Crash in Scotland Kills 258, subheaded Syracuse Students on Board." It's a Mercury News Wire Services story, Dateline London. Skipping down in the story, continuing on the inside pages, in today's edition, the Washington Post quoted a State Department spokesman as saying 6 members of the department's Diplomatic Security Service who were returning from Beirut were aboard the jet. State Department spokesman Ben Justesen, J-U-S-T-E-S-E-N, said he could not confirm the report, so perhaps the number was even higher. We don't know. At the very least, we can say that obviously a large chunk of the U.S. national security establishment's counter-terrorist expertise in that part of the world was deep-sixed on this particular flight. A couple of the questions that this revelation raises. First of all, I wonder what information some of these individuals might have been able to shed upon one aspect or another of the Iran-Contra scandal, given their expertise, namely counterterrorism, and given the fact that counterterrorism, obviously, as indicated above, and is pretty obvious to anybody who has examined the Iran-Contra scandal, is the general heading under which just about all of the activities could be subsumed. It's interesting, too, that in the article, U.S. intelligence sources were saying that the violent deaths of so many U.S. intelligence and counterterrorist personnel in that part of the world has served to intimidate a great many of the people involved with that type of work. I wonder, again, going back to the scenario of the play-action-pass, the metaphor that I developed in the beginning of the program, I wonder to what extent the death of Amiram Nir and the deaths of these particular individuals may have served to intimidate individuals that perhaps might have had information to disclose concerning the Iran-Contra scandal. Obviously, we can't say for sure, but given all of the other deaths that took place in connection with the Iran-Contra scandal, given the pivotal position that many of these same individuals, Messieurs Nir, Messieurs Lariviere, Monsieur Lariviere, Monsieur O'Connor, and so forth, given their pivotal position in the counter-terrorist milieu in the Middle East, one wonders to what extent their deaths may have served as intimidators to some of the other linebackers. Perhaps some of the other linebackers were perhaps inclined to play the run and may not be paying as much attention to the aerial game as they might otherwise have. Again, a working hypothesis. I'm not saying this is. This goes into the category, as I like to say on this program, of food for thought and grounds for further research. The questions I'm asking here again, to what extent the deaths of these U.S. counterterrorist officials on this flight may have, first of all, eliminated people with hard information to contribute about, say, the October surprise or another aspect of the Iran-Contra scandal, Oliver North's shocking connections to Mansour al-Qassar, a man connected with the drug smuggling and terrorist activities of Abu Nidal and Abu Abbas, among others, two of the main players on the terrorist stage in 1985 and 86, the period during which the U.S. and Israel and Oliver North and the late Amiram Nir were coordinating U.S. and Israeli counter-terrorist activities, as alluded to in the documents mentioned in the Bob Woodward article that floated after Nir's death. Again, I wonder, looking here, and I wonder how many linebackers, how many people with information concerning the Iran-Contra scandal may have been frozen either by the threat of prosecution or the threat of elimination, i.e. assassination, by both the Pizza Connection 4 bust, made public on December 2nd of 1988, the death of Amiram Nir, made public on December 2nd of 1988, and the deaths of these many U.S. counterterrorist specialists on the PamAm Flight 103. Now, interestingly enough, one of the main names connected with the discussion of the bombing, and it has now been established that it was a terrorist bomb that brought down PamAm Flight 103, one of the main names mentioned in connection with this is none other than Abu Nidal. Reading from the San Francisco Examiner of Friday, December 23rd of 1988. This is an article by Keith Graves, Graves, an appropriate name under the circumstances. This is special to the Examiner at Dateline Nicosia, Cyprus, headlined, Police Seek Bomb Bits. FBI Joins Probe of Pan Am Crash. That's the same FBI under William Sessions, who overheard the Judge Wood trial pertaining to the company, who effected the bust of Pizza Connection 4 on December 2nd of 1988. The same day Reagan announces he won't release sensitive documents, the same day Amiram Nir's death is announced, 2 days later that death discloses the existence of very, very sensitive documents pertaining to Amiram Nir, Oliver North, their counter-terrorist activities, and, among others, Abu Nidal, associate of, among others, North associate Mansour al-Qassar. Reading now from the Examiner of December 23rd, 1988, front page story, Police Seek Bomb Bits by Keith Graves, Nicosia, Cyprus. It reads in part, while Palestinian Liberation Organization Chairman Yasser Arafat was making his dramatic statement renouncing terrorism and recognizing Israel to journalists in Geneva last week, his aides were grimly warning reporters, quote, don't forget, we do not control all Palestinian elements. Don't expect an end to violence. Expect something dramatic to try and discredit us and turn the world against us again, unquote. As the search for the wreckage in Scotland for physical clues and the dragnet for information got underway Thursday, speculation in the United States and other intelligence communities has indeed centered on shadowy Mideast terrorist groups who have split away from the PLO. One focus of American suspicions, according to some reports, is Abu Musa, a Palestinian who bitterly opposes Arafat. He is believed to have built the explosive device discovered in a suitcase by British security agents shortly after it was loaded onto an El Al Boeing 747 at London's Heathrow Airport in April of 1986. A more prominent candidate is the infamous Abu Nidal terror group, reportedly named in the December 5th phone call to the U.S. Embassy in Helsinki, which warned of a bomb attempt on a PamAm flight and prompted a worldwide alert. A U.S. State Department spokesman U.S. State Department spokeswoman Phyllis Oakley said the caller had targeted PamAm and told the embassy that the device would be provided to an unwitting female carrier by people with ties to Abu Nidal. Both Oakley and Finnish officials say there is not yet any evidence linking the call to the crash of Flight 103, but the disaster, should it prove to be sabotage, has many of the earmarks of an Abu Nidal operation. Okay, now bear in mind, Abu Nidal is currently supposed to be harbored by Muammar Gaddafi. More about Gaddafi later in the broadcast. Bear in mind also that Abu Nidal is connected with Mansour al-Qassar, the same Mansour al-Qassar who works with, among others, Oliver North, Ottfried Hepp, German neo-Nazi and terrorist par excellence, and others. The same Mansour al-Qassar who undoubtedly has to have figured prominently in the U.S.-Israeli counter-terrorist documents disclosed by the Bob Woodward story on December 4th of 1988. Remember, 2 days previous to that, Reagan says he won't disclose to the North Defense any documents which are too sensitive. Now we have Abu Nidal's name, the same Abu Nidal associated with Mansour al-Qassar, and through Qassar to Oliver North, the man he supposedly was going to kill, according to Oliver North. We have Abu Abbas connected with Mansour al-Qassar. Abu Abbas and Abu Nidal, key players on the terrorist stage in 85-86, the key period we're looking at. Now, the thing that I think is significant about Abu Nidal and this entire situation is that Nidal had been sort of out of view, and there had been widespread speculation that Abu Nidal was an agent provocateur either for the U.S. or Israel. Certainly, he had broken from Arafat and appeared to be working at counter purposes with Yasser Arafat. Now, 5 days after the article from the Examiner I just read you appeared, that was from December 23rd of 1988, who should surface but Abu Nidal? He hadn't been seen in a while. All of a sudden, Abu Nidal pops up. Reading from the San Jose Mercury of Wednesday, December 28th of 1988, an LA Times story, Dateline Nicosia, Cyprus, headlined, Abu Nidal reportedly surfaces, subheaded Most Wanted Terrorist in Lebanon to bid kidnapped girls farewell before their release. This from the Mercury of 12/28/88, Evening Edition. Abu Nidal, the world's most wanted terrorist and a possible suspect in last week's crash of a PamAm jumbo jet, was reported Tuesday to have made a rare appearance in Lebanon. A spokesman for Abu Nidal's guerrilla group, Fatah Revolutionary Council, said the leader had visited a secret base, unquote, in Lebanon to say farewell to 2 kidnapped French girls who were about to be released by the organization. The spokesman said Abu Nidal visited the base with his second-in-command, Salim Ahmed, AHMED. He did not say when or where the meeting took place. Now, I will say that I'm the last person that will attempt to comment authoritatively as to whether Abu Nidal did or did not surface, and I'll be the last person to say whether or not the Abu Nidal organization did, in fact, place a bomb aboard PamAm Flight 103, whether it was done in Frankfurt as indicated or anywhere else. But the fact that Abu Nidal's name has surfaced in connection with it is highly significant for reasons I will talk about on the next side of this tape.